Hey, it's Zach. Before we dive in, I wanted to thank you for tuning in. When we soft launched after last year's election, your response surpassed my wildest expectations. You didn't just subscribe, you funded Iowa Starting Line and made it an easy decision for my editor to continue this show into 2025. That's all thanks to you, and I'm incredibly grateful. I know there are countless podcasts competing for your attention, so it means a lot that you're choosing to start the new year with me. Looking ahead, I'm recommitting to our core vision, stories about Iowans for Iowans. At a time when many local outlets are going regional or national, chasing clicks instead of connections, we're doubling down on what matters: our community, our stories, our state. We do our best work when we're having real conversations about what matters. This isn't just about opposition or resistance, it's about ideas, your ideas. Of course, I have my biases, I have my values, and just like everyone else, I want to see them enacted in this world. But I strive to be fair at the same time, to try to understand what's happening so we can all form better opinions. My job is to bring you conversations with people shaping Iowa, from politicians to cultural leaders, and to give you the information that you need to draw your own conclusions. We've all seen what the right has done to our water, our schools, and our healthcare, and we know we deserve better, and we'll have better. This show is free, and I rarely ask for anything beyond clicking subscribe, but today I'm asking you to share this with someone else, someone who cares about the future of Iowa, who wants great things for this state. Together, we're building a neighborhood, and I'm glad you're here. Happy New Year, and let's get to work.
What I've been saying now is ideas coming out that they did not come from Iowans. They came from outside think tanks saying, this is working in this state or that state. Why don't you make it work in Iowa? Without asking Iowans.
Welcome to Cornhole Champions, a weekly podcast powered by Iowa Starting Line, where we throw bags at the state's biggest stories. I'm Zachary Oren Smith. It's Wednesday, and for the first episode of the year, I'm joined by a special guest, one of my favorite voices from the Iowa Starting Line team, Chase Seibert. On this episode, we're less than a week out from the start of the 2025 Iowa Legislative session. We trolled around to get a sense of what they might have in mind for legislation going forward. Also, Iowa Democrats re-elected Chair Rita Hart, what it means and what it doesn't. Also, hear directly from a Senate Democrat leader about a push to feed kids and the candidate trying to flip an Eastern Iowa Senate seat blue. That's coming up on Cornhole Champions. So, Chase.
Zach.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Have you seen Nosferatu yet?
I have. Have you seen it?
Yeah, I have seen it. My wife and I watched it 2 days ago. And for me, there are very few objective measures in art. But I think a really important one for the future of cinema is going to be how many rats are in this movie. And I'm going to tell you, my objective measure of movies rated this one really high, like 2,000 rats, like
Real
easily
rats.
the most rats I've seen on camera in who knows.
Yeah, and they are real. He's a freak about real, like, rat. I mean, he likes to use real things. I mean, the director's a madman when it comes to that kind of thing. So yeah, did you like it then? Really? Did you?
Oh, I loved it. What is the name of the director? It's
Robert Eggers.
Robert Eggers. So he did The Lighthouse, right?
Yeah. Yep.
What I dug about Nosferatu was it just felt like a big Hollywood buy. I understand it was like shot in Prague, but like it just felt the number of sets that they were working in. I'll mention again the 2,000 rats the stars, 2,000 stars of stage and screen that appeared in this movie. Some of the shots. So I'm to spoil everything. That final shot where they like zoom out on Nosferatu's body in the bed.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Well, the lighting, come on.
Yeah, unbelievable. I thought it was awesome too. Felt like it was accessible to normal audiences too, which seems to be reflecting in the box office. Like it's doing really well, which I try not to care about, but I want people like that to keep getting funding to make movies. And I absolutely loved it. It was just so gorgeous. Like easily the most visually beautiful movie all year. So
It was so gorgeous and also so goopy. The number of just fluids that do be flying in this
my
movie.
parents hated it, and my dad said it was gross.
In a word, yeah, I like the 1 star. Pretty gross. Is
Yeah.
not an inaccurate.
It was exactly
I-
what you said. Yeah, just fluids, just so much fluids, and
Yeah, 2000 another objective measure is the fluids by volume present in a script. Like if you gotta how much gush, what is the gush factor of a particular movie is pretty important.
absolutely.
First story for the new year. This week, the U.S. Congress convened and quickly certified the results of the 2025 election. Trump won, and not a single Democrat objected. There was no end to the MAGA crowd talking about Antifa storming the Capitol this January, but it turns out that was just on them. And that was just on Twitter. U.S. Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa is once again the third in line for the president. To mark this auspicious occasion, Chase and I prepared lists of things that are younger than our U.S. Senator. This is a time-tested and important ritual. Every time Grassley ascends higher and higher in office, we have to remember we remember him, we think of him, and try to drag him back down to earth. Chase, do you want to start with your first thing that is younger than Chuck Grassley?
Yes, canned beer.
Canned beer.
And this is actually a lot later than I thought. 1935.
1935 is when the first beer was canned. Is that true?
Official birthday of the beer can, January 24th, 1935. The first cans of Kruger's Finest Beer and Kruger's Cream Ale went on sale in Richmond, Virginia. But the beer can really made its debut 14 months earlier, just before the repeal of Prohibition, which is also around the same time Chuck Grassley was.
To celebrate, we're putting beer in cans. I love American innovation, truly. My first one is France's standard method of judicial execution, the guillotine, executes its last victim in 1977, nearly 20 years after Grassley joined the Iowa Legislature.
So he's been around a while.
He's been around a while. The guillotine had sated its thirst in that time.
I knew you'd work that in there somehow.
What's your next?
FM radio, 1933. December 26, 1933, FM radio was delivered, clear sound, free of static. Armstrong received the patent. So that's when the patent was created for FM radio, which is almost gone now. It's almost had its whole lifetime. It feels like obviously it still exists, but it seems like it's
Chuck Grassley was holding the wee babe FM radio in his arms, only to have it also die in his arms. It's really nice continuity.
It really is.
My next one is it's 1973. ABBA has released its seminal album. ABBA, I imagine in the cloakroom, Chuck jamming to some ABBA.
I do too.
What's your next?
This one is a little more generic, but I do think it just encapsulates how old he is. But there's no exact date here, but the creation of rock and roll, that is it's kind of a mid 50s. It's classified as mid 50s. I think you can go back to the 40s.
Yeah.
If you want to get really early on, but
Lonnie Donegan's Rock Island line is played and recorded. Yeah, for sure. Rock and roll.
I bet that was a good rock and roll. He's outlived rock and roll.
Rock and roll did die famously. Okay, I got one. American Nazi Party leader George Lincoln Rockwell was shot and killed in 1967 in a laundromat. Reminding us of that great American tradition of putting down Nazis 1 year after Grassley won his 5th term in the Iowa House. So that's fun.
I appreciate your creativity here. This is much better than my list.
You're doing great. What's your next?
You're already up to a great start. Sticking on the alcohol, I guess, the end of Prohibition, because that just seems so long ago. December 5th, 1933, like I said, around the same time as the first canned beer.
I'm gonna be honest. That's that feels like such a impossibly long time ago, right? Yeah. Prohibition. That is kind of remarkable that this was right in his childhood. Prohibition was repealed. What you got?
The microwave oven, which is earlier than I thought. I figured that'd be 60s. That is 1945.
I'm sure that like first microwave oven was just like an open door. Just the microwaves were like you bask in it as like a kind of
Push some
a
heat in.
homeopathy treatment.
Yeah.
My next is ibuprofen was discovered by Stuart Adams and John Nicholson in 1961, and Grassley was in his second term in the Iowa Legislature.
Man, that couldn't decide if that was like, I was surprised ibuprofen's been around that long or if it feels like it's been around forever. It just seems
I
like
just kind of assumed it was because like what is it? Is it aspirin? That's like the derivative of birch bark, right? I just kind of assumed that it's like always kind of been in the like apothecaries. They'd have like bottles of Iberin, which would become ibuprofen. I don't know. I know nothing about medicine generally. In my family, we kind of do levels of headaches. So, right, is this a level 1 headache? Is this a level 3 headache? And that corresponds exactly to, that's 1 ibuprofen. That's 3 ibuprofen. Maybe not a doctor recommended use of the pill, but certainly one I use.
Polio vaccine, 1952. Created in the early 50s by Jonas Salk, licensed April 12, 1955.
Jonas Salk was really on one.
He was. Great guy.
Thank you, Jonah. One of my favorite Jonas, easily. Next one for me is the year's 1960, and America elects its first Catholic president, John F. Kennedy, and subsequently off him, another one of my assassinations, both of which were on Grassley's watch, both the election and the assassination of John F. Kennedy. I'm certain there is no connection there.
No
connection. There's no accusation that he had anything to do with either the election or assassination of JFK. I just want to make that very clear.
Credit cards were invented a lot earlier than I expected.
When were they invented?
1950 is what I have here.
1950 is much... I would have thought that would have been like a 1982 kind of area.
Frank McNamara, who created the Diners Club card. However, the concept of credit's obviously been around for centuries. History of but that's I think the more modern rendition. The magnetic stripe verification was introduced in the 60s.
Yeah, but I mean, like the value, me holding the combined chickens of our neighborhood and giving a receipt for that credit, that's been around.
Yeah.
At least for a couple of months now. My chicken-based economy here in Iowa City. Let's see, my next one. The goddess of pop, Cher, was born in 1946. Grassley was 13 years old. I think of Cher as being like this kind of like you want to talk about a Nosferatu among us, right? Like I think of Cher as being like this ageless creature from beyond, right? I love her music. Don't get me wrong, but like, I mean, if you've seen a photo of her, she looks like she's maybe in her 50s.
She looks great.
I don't know if you saw the seminal, speaking of ABBA, the seminal sequel to Mamma Mia, Mamma Mia 2, Here We Go Again. One of my favorite movies. Cher has a cameo in there, and she looks younger than I do. Like, I got more crow's feet than Cher does at the age of 30.
ABBA 2 still on, or Here We Go Again, still on my list. Haven't gotten her.
Gotta Here We Go Again. You got another?
I was actually reading this last night in a healthcare book that I'm reading. It's about the origins of like the healthcare industry in the United States. And I was reading that the first anesthesia department was created in 1936 in Massachusetts General Hospital.
What were we doing before that?
There was another one too. I think it was like the first ICU with ventilators was also around the same time.
I mean, before that, it was just the town butcher, I imagine, would come in and do his grim work.
They did make a comment about like the first kind of insurance basically gave you 21 days for a certain price because they're like in 21 days you either know like you're either gonna make it or
the sepsis. You have a pretty good sense of whether the gangrene gotcha or not in 20. God,
yeah,
that sucks. So cheers to another year of power. U.S. Senator Chuck Grassley, who is this year 91 years old. Congrats, Chuck.
Congrats, Chuck.
Second story. On Saturday, the Iowa Democratic Party State Central Committee elected its new chair, Rita Hart of Clinton, Iowa. This is the first time in a decade that Democrats re-elected their previous chair. Chase, was this something you were paying much attention to?
Yeah, I was curious to see if there would be any challenge. Full disclosure, I'm very online. I don't know how in touch I am with like maybe the average Iowa Democrat. Like, obviously, I'm around a lot of younger people, but I'll say there didn't seem to be a lot of excitement, just because Rita Hart has no like online presence. You don't really like hear from her a whole lot.
Right.
But like I started seeing Rob Sand and other like prominent Iowa Democrats come out in support of her, basically saying that like, the IDP didn't have a full-time staff before her. They didn't have a budget, or they were like in the hole basically on their budget. And Rita Hart kind of started getting these things in place. Rob Sand tried to make like a numbers argument that as bad as, the whole country went, pretty far to the right this last election, that Iowa like maybe didn't do as bad. I do think he was reaching a little for these numbers that he was trying to pull out. So on the one hand, if that's true, that like she's made this into a, at least like something that didn't exist before, that's good. It doesn't seem there's a lot of excitement because she doesn't put herself out there to talk. She apparently does not believe in social media, doesn't do a lot of media. She's told people directly that I know that she doesn't like, isn't big on it. So I guess it's probably a good time to go over, Zach, what the IDP chair does.
Yeah, and the IDP chair is kind of a weird position, right? And like when this is an important question to think about, particularly in the context of an election, because I think the IDP is kind of a CEO, right, of the kind of broader party. This is a position that is thinking about we pick them based on their vision for what they can bring to the party, what they can bring to the races that IDP will help with. It's a lot of fundraising. It's a lot of management. It's a lot of trying to put people in positions to help campaigns do their work. The IDP does a lot with mailers. They do a lot with paid media. They do a lot of outreach to places like Iowa Starting Line and the Des Moines Register to try to build some conversation around these candidates. I think what's been interesting, right? Like you mentioned, like I mentioned in the intro, that this is the first time in a decade that Democrats reelected their chair. The people that vote on, this isn't a general election. This isn't run by like your county auditor. This is done by a group of activists that have been with the party normally have been with the party for some time. This is a group that's elected most of which are elected from the caucus level, right? As part of that, it's the long part that people don't tend to stick around for. When we think about what I can see there were some arguments circling around online about why you might want to keep someone along have like someone with the same vision for longer than 4 years, right? That because they have to re-vote on this every 4 years, I think for some folks, at least in the recent history, it's been we've seen a lot of repudiation. Troy Price after the Iowa caucus debacle of, was that 2020?
2020,
that was the year that Troy Price was thrown. I don't think he ran for re-election, to be honest, but this was people were looking to find someone to blame for kind of the awful the mishigas that went on with that caucus. I think there's a sense that the chair of the IDP is kind of the voice of all Democrats, but I think it's also important to remember that an individual Democrat in the legislature, a county supervisor who's a Democrat, these folks can and often do disagree about what outcomes the party more generally ought to be going after, right? The chair isn't necessarily kind of the source of ultimate policy-making authority. They convene folks. We had a really bad November, Democrats did, and so I could understand someone looking to headhunt during this election. But we saw 78% of the folks in that room decided to vote for Hart. That her vision was one they wanted, and she has some stuff she can brag on, right? When she was elected last time, IDP had laid off 2 staffers. There was no full-time finance, communications, or data staff. They were $100,000 in debt. And on top of that, the DNC was pretty hostile, right? This was a period when the DNC was coming for the Iowa caucuses, and Iowa Democrats were figuring out kind of like, how do they feel about this kind of age-old tradition that the party's kind of known for here in the state. In a letter to donors, Hart bragged bragged on the party's more efficient structure for campaign donations. She said 92% of dollars from campaigns and donors went to paid media and voter turnout, which is pretty slick. So much of what the IDP is able to do in a calendar year is is staffing, right? It's giving, putting people in place to be able to think, who have some training, who have some sense of how election filings work, have a sense of like how grassroots door knocking should be approached. How do we strategically, if we have limited resources and infinite need, right? Like how do we best cover this with the limited donor dollars that we have here, right? And clearly the vast majority of that room decided that Rita Hart had shown, even in a really tough year, some gains.
Yeah. So I'm willing to keep an open mind, especially if she's doing a lot of that like dirty behind the scenes work.
Yeah.
But it's like, I do think you got to have your spokesperson. You got to have someone out there like just talking media constantly, like who is the face of the party, who is someone that is like getting your message out there.
We hope to have the chair, Rita Hart, on the podcast in the coming weeks. I sent a copy of her vision document that she sent to the people that were voting on the chair, and one of the things that she made no bones about was that we're pointing towards 2026, right? If you're really trying, like a presidential election year is a big deal, but there were really two competitive congressional seats that were up for grabs this past November. Iowa's first and Iowa's third. In 2026, I mean, I think everyone is really pointed towards whether Democrats can kind of get the ship together and contend for the governor's mansion, right? I mean, I think that's a really big question. And if we're talking about what does the Iowa Democratic Party look like in 10 years, right? I think I think party activists would tell you it's like look to that 2026 gubernatorial race. It's likely that State Auditor Rob Sand is going to throw his hat in the race with his massive war chest and his the kind of interesting role he plays in being a Democrat, but also kind of trying to find a kind of independent voice for his campaign in there. It's going to be an interesting thing to watch. Rita Hart was definitely positioned to do a lot of to shape a lot of the conversations, to convene a lot of the conversations that we have as we point towards that year. Third, God, that was a lot. Woof. Third story, Iowa Republican lawmakers say they're not done finding ways to lower property taxes across the state. A proposal by Iowans for tax relief would limit local property tax growth to 2%. While not endorsed by Republican leaders, it's a window into what lawmakers are cooking up for the coming session. Iowa is higher than the national average for property taxes. Isn't that right, Chase?
Yeah. So I was looking that up. And it is very interesting, but I was talking to a couple people who know about this and looking into it a little more. And basically every state, you have your buckets of your taxes, whether you might be a little bit higher on property, a little bit lower on sales, higher on income, lower on property. And in Iowa, we're a little bit higher on property taxes, like I think 10th in the U.S. But what happens is when you start messing with these, I mean, you kind of have to like make up for it eventually somewhere else. And we're cutting our income tax, doing the flat tax that went in this year. So I guess the interesting thing in the short term is when we're going to like run out of our budget surplus. But a lot of people do seem to like bring up, it seems like on social media, whenever you get people on property taxes, you get just heated in the comments from these older people, but I do think there are some cases looking that higher property taxes aren't all bad. One interesting case was Texas and Colorado, where Colorado has low property taxes. Texas has a little bit higher property taxes. And what it can help with higher property taxes is like less speculation. Because when you have those property taxes that cost more, people aren't just going to come in, buy up land and flip and sell because you have to deal with the property tax element of it. So you see a little bit more of that speculation in Colorado, a little bit less in Texas.
That's interesting.
I also think it is like a fairer tax, just personally.
Say more.
The amount of land and property you own, you pay a tax, based on that. I think it's a bit more progressive, especially when, a lot of people struggle to even own land as it is. So it hits people who own property, who own more property more than people that don't. Like we talked about though, Republicans can do whatever they want this year. So if they want to cut property taxes, and it will be a cap, so it doesn't like it's just like they're just no more property taxes. So they're just like putting a limit on it. But I was going to ask you. I know you've written about, and there are concerns about budget shortfalls. Between all of we're just slashing the taxes, slashing.
Yeah, when this is like kind of I think if we're thinking about like big themes of from Iowa Legislature to Iowa Legislature year over year, I think this is one of them, right? Which is that local governments have to they have responsibilities, right? You got snow removal, you got clean water, you've got rock roads that need new rock, right? You've got a number of costs associated with running local government, right? And it is important. I think anyone can look at these services and say you may disagree about how much the dog catcher should make in a calendar year, but we probably need someone catching dogs, right? The problem that we're beginning to see that if you find a city manager and they'll tell you the funding streams that used to be really diverse for our local governments, for our county governments, have shrunk in a big way, right? Libraries used to have a special levy that they used to be able to go to the voters, say, hey, we'd like a certain amount of money. We'd like a certain percentage levy rate in order to fund our services. They can no longer do that. That levy rate has been eliminated, and suddenly the libraries are having to apply for funding from local governments, further cutting into the pie that they have at their disposal. And when we talk about when we talk about the flat tax that the state leaders have been working to implement, this is further kind of shrinking the amount of money available to the state. When we talk about limits on local government and what levies they're able to go after, conservation bonds, et cetera. We're just kind of siphoning away the options that we have to provide the services that Iowans depend on, right? That make places like Des Moines, places like Iowa City, places like Muscatine, these things that make our cities livable, that make them places we want to live. We can't afford to do the improvements on the trail project that someone was really excited about. I'm thinking Muscatine, the municipal golf course, right? If I don't like golf and I don't play golf, but like, if someone's living there because they really dig that golf course. I mean, if the municipal, if they can't, if they are losing the revenue that they're using to fund that golf course, I mean, I think that's a real worry for Iowans, rich and poor.
And so it's DART, that's one of the big ones for
the bus system. Yeah, I've been reading a little bit about that. When we lose this revenue, I worry about questions of brain drain, right? I worry about like what brings people to Iowa, what keeps people bright young people like Chase Seibert in Des Moines, right? And I think it's in relation to that question.
I think part of what and it's going to get worse, is people aren't seeing Iowa's roads are notoriously not very good.
Yeah.
Our schools are kind of like falling down the ladder. So there's people like, I'm paying these taxes, but like, what am I getting in return? And that's just potentially going to get worse as we keep cutting and slashing. And then eventually we're going to have to start raising them. And that won't be super popular necessarily either. But it'd be like a force to, instead of like want to do for a certain project. I did see like one thing that can potentially help offset the property tax increases a little is like if you build more, if you build more properties, which there is a lot of growth, I think, in some of at least the Des Moines suburbs, that can help offset. Like the more you build, the more you broaden your base, the more people paying property taxes. So that is like a potential offset. But yeah, in recent years, our property tax growth has like outgrown inflation, like the national average, by quite a bit. It's kind of interesting to read about. I had no idea.
Yeah. I'm pretty amenable to residents having a wide variety of beliefs about what the property tax ought to be, right? A wide variety of beliefs on what whether or not to pass a school bond, right? Whether or not to pass a library levy, whether or not to pass a conservation bond, right? Iowa looks like a lot of different things. Burlington does not look like Iowa City, does not look like Council Bluffs, does not look like Sioux City, does not, et cetera, right? My primary concern here is that when we're given less avenues for cities, right, then the people that we elect to make decisions for our cities, our counties, our local government, we tie their hands, right,
Yep.
to be able to adjust tax code, to be able to adjust, to adjust the kind of levers of government to the needs of, the people they were elected to serve, and that feels like that's not in service of anyone.
Yeah, I agree.
One of the changes the legislature made a couple years ago was to take apartment buildings out of the commercial property tax category and make them multi-residential, a sector taxed at a much lower rate. This was a huge drop in funding, particularly for cities and metros. For our cornhole matchup this week, I spoke with a woman leading Iowa Democrats in the state Senate about where the money for these cuts would come from. We also get into an interesting conversation about the way that Iowa Democrats hope to feed kids in schools. That's coming up on Cornhole Champions. The Iowa Legislature returns to Des Moines next week. Any idea has to pass through the legislature before it can become a law. And that means it has to find purchase among the solid Republican majorities in both chambers. State Senator Janice Weiner is a Democrat from Iowa City. At the end of last year, her peers elevated her to lead their caucus. Hello, Janice.
Hi, Zach. How are you?
I'm well. It's a period for priorities, and you can read about Janice's conversation with my colleague Nicole Hittrick at iowastartingline.com. One of the ideas I was interested to be reading about was the way that the caucus wants to push to make school lunches free across the state. Can you tell me a little bit about kind of what you would want to propose there?
I'd be happy to. This has actually been my initiative for the last two sessions before this one. It's pretty basic. If kids are hungry, they can't learn. And we want our kids across this state to succeed, whether they're in public school or non-public school. And it really gives them a leg up. You also have the issue where there's, some kids get free and reduced school lunch. Others may not have signed up for it, or they may be within this much of being eligible for it, but they don't get it, and their parents really can't afford it. It would make life so much easier if we just fed the kids. I mean, they're kids. We should just feed them.
And like you say, I mean, we already have free through the free and reduced program, sort of federal subsidy to help low income students receive either kind of a partial cost for meals or free meals. Is this proposal you're asking for state funds to cover that kind of what isn't covered by that federal reimbursement?
Yes, exactly. To me, while there are substantial upfront costs, it will really pay off in the long run, because just imagine how much easier it's going to be for all these kids to learn, how many fewer problems there will be in the classroom, and the opportunities for these kids to succeed, as well as the burden it will lift from their parents, knowing that they're getting, if they get breakfast as well, if they're getting 1 or 2 square meals at school, so they don't have to worry about that.
I was reading some of the literature around this topic. One was kind of looking at teachers reporting in on kind of what they after some of these programs have been implemented, and it showed significant impact on kind of what their observations on academic performance, as well as their kind of noted behavioral issues reduced in their classrooms. In some other states, we've seen free meals increase attendance, reduce rates of suspension, improve student health overall health, and test scores for particularly poor students.
Right.
Can you walk me through why this isn't already a policy in the state? It seems like kind of a bare minimum responsibility of the state to prevent hunger, particularly among children.
You set the stage at the beginning of this, talking about the Republicans having a solid majority. It's not part of their plan right now. I would love for them to take this up. I would be more than happy to hand this bill off to any Republican who wants to run it. I I have honestly no ego in this. I just want to feed the kids. So, and it will cost money, right? And we know that that our tax revenues are going down. We know that this coming fiscal year and the fiscal year after that, because the so-called flat tax is being implemented, that there will be less money coming in. But everybody says that Iowa kids succeeding and having opportunity is their goal. Well, then let's put our money where our mouths are. Let's literally feed the kids.
And schools are uniquely qualified to do this work. They are already feeding students. They already have infrastructure for these meals. They are already a site for 500,000 public school students across the state. And other states have done this work. New Mexico, Minnesota, Colorado, Maine, and California, as well as a couple of other states that have limited kind of shorter term programs. And one of the challenges, right, that they've witnessed has been cost, right? Like when we talk about these programs, the thing that keeps coming, it came up in Minnesota, came up in New Mexico, came up in Colorado, that kind of the initial estimates for what these programs would cost when you offer the option for students to be fed during schools, students that forgoed meals or brought their own choose to eat, right? They choose to make use of this program, and so and therefore you do see kind of like cost estimates swell. Can you tell me a little bit about the surpluses that the state currently has? This is money that's currently set aside. Can you tell me a little bit about kind of how that fits into what kind of potential that offers for states like Iowa as we're trying to think about trying to connect policy priorities to the real world?
We have the taxpayer relief fund, and there's a rainy day fund, and I think I'll have to look it up, but I think there's around $2 billion in money that's just been socked away right now. And a chunk of that, if you ask my colleague Senator Quirnbach, he would tell you that a big chunk of that is really money that could have or should have gone to public schools if we were keeping up with inflation. So you can look at it that way, or you can just look at it as investing our tax dollars back into our people so that they can be productive, learning young people and move forward in the world. So obviously there are funds there. The past couple of years since I've been in the legislature, I think our Republican colleagues have only budgeted about 82% of what they were allowed to. So essentially it's a question of priorities. What are our priorities? To me, it really ought to be a priority. In addition to it producing higher test scores and more success, and it can also reduce pressure on other programs like SNAP and so forth. And what some teachers are having to do right now is go out and buy granola bars and other things that they're keeping in their desk drawers because they know the kids are hungry. I would ask any adult out there who's listening to this to think how you feel and how you act when you haven't eaten for too long, whether you're hangry or whether you've gotten frustrated or you just can't focus, and then think of that from the perspective of a kid. So
Right.
again, I just go back to the fact they're kids. Let's just feed them. Plus, lunch debt shouldn't be a thing.
Yeah, lunch debt being when a student is unable to afford a meal and is hungry, decides to get a lunchroom meal, they can rack up a certain amount of an amount of debt.
Right, they can rack up debt. I mean, some places may or may not give them a full meal, but then people will give money to retire lunch debt at various school districts.
Right.
It just seems to me that if we view government as public service and as creating basically a platform and foundation for all Iowans to succeed, this is pretty basic.
We're recording on Monday, and I was reading in the Gazette, House Speaker Pat Grassley had told the Gazette that, we really have to be thinking about, this is an exact quote, but a paraphrase, that we have to be thinking about for local governments, what are those key services? What are those central services? And you're saying that we should be adding feeding children, putting bread in the mouths of children to those priorities. One of the challenges that we're going to face is right now there's a proposal, Iowa's for tax relief, as well as some state leaders have called for further constraining local government services and budgets as a priority for this coming session, particularly looking at property taxes. They're looking to get more consistency across for property tax bills. And when you came to the legislature, you came by way of a city council, a local government. Can you walk me through during your time in city council, kind of how you saw some of the changes to property tax law? I mean, I think for a lot of folks, this is kind of a boring in the weeds topic, but it has big implications for things like getting clean water in our cities and walking trails that make these places good places to live. Can you walk me through kind of how cuts to property tax and what cities can and cannot ask for, how that connects to these services?
I'd be happy to. I'm not quite sure how to make it not wonky, but back in 2013, the legislature enacted commercial property tax changes, which reduced the amount of taxes city and county governments and school districts, because they're the ones who benefit from property taxes, would get from the commercial side. And initially, they also enacted a backfill so that the communities that had this money, these funds suddenly taken away, would be in essence made whole. Well, even though that was enacted into law, the legislature has since decided that they would change that the cities didn't really need the backfill anymore, and so that is phasing out, and I think it will be gone by about, I'm not sure of the exact date, but I think by 2030. So that was,
to be clear, they reduced their percentage of properties, the percentages of taxable value, right? The
right.
amount of money that they can take in from existing value in their cities. And
Correct.
while they initially were offering a certain amount of money,
Right.
to kind of compensate cities for the value that they've taken away for services, they're phasing that out.
And some cities, including the city where I was on city council, sort of saw the writing on the wall and thought and was pretty sure that the backfill wasn't going to be forever and prepared for that. But not every city or county was able to do that. They just didn't necessarily have the funds. So that was part one. The other part was deciding that multifamily, another part of that was never backfilled, or never sort of, the cities were never made and nobody was made whole on, was multifamily residences, and deciding that instead of to tax them like the businesses they are, to tax them at property tax, have their property taxes based on being them equivalent to private individuals, which is a much lower rate. So, I mean, I would argue if we're going to change something, even if my Republican colleagues don't want to ratchet that back up to the commercial level, like create some sort of interim level, so that, because we know that they're not, and maybe exempt really small ones, like two or four apartment units, but big multifamily units are absolutely businesses. And it seems to me that has really hurt budgets substantially, because there's no compensation for that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I back up and say, when you look at the bigger scheme of things, I would encourage everyone, even if it sounds boring and wonky, go to one of the budget sessions of your city, your county, your school board, and see watch when the heads of departments come out explaining what they're asking for, what they'd be using the funds for. For the most part, a very high percentage goes to personnel, who are the ones who make our cities, counties, and schools function. And I did not, we were always sort of looking to, at least when I was on council, we were always looking to try and reduce the levy. We were reducing the levy year on year until, in fact, I think this past year they couldn't anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that cities and counties, no matter where they are in this state and what size they are, want to tax more, but they have certain obligations to the people. It's public safety in the full scope of and breadth of public safety. It's roads, it's sewers, it's clean water. And the dirtier the water coming in, the more they have to put into trying to clean up that water. And then sewer lines break and various other things have to be replaced. And there's public transit and a whole host of services that a city provides. I mean, people expect amenities, they expect parks, they expect playgrounds. It's part of living in a society like this. It's part of one of the reasons that we pay taxes. So
Right.
I think as we look at the landscape across the state this year, you'd be hard pressed to find a local government that is living high on the hog. That really has that really has any extra money or extra funds. I think it's going to be funds. I think it's going to be a very tight and difficult budget year because
Right.
they're still trying to absorb the changes that were made 2 sessions ago.
Yeah. They've eliminated things like the optional tax that can be levied for public libraries, right? And public libraries are suddenly having to deal with this loss of funding. Cities are dealing with this loss of funding. I think, in general, right? Reading this morning about some of these cuts, I was thinking, right, like what will this mean for quality of life in our cities? What will this mean for these services that, like you say, I mean, we have an obligation to some extent. We've already invested in. We already provide these. This is the reason some people live in these towns.
I mean, I would urge my colleagues, and I will urge them in person, to bring a lot of these local officials to the table. County supervisors from all sizes of counties, rural counties, suburban areas, urban areas. Talk to the county supervisors. Talk to mayors and city councilors. Talk to city managers. Allow them to come to the table and explain what they're dealing with, and why it is they are concerned about for the cuts, why it is that the a potential cap would be damaging, particularly to growing cities. I saw in the Gazette that you've referenced, I think yesterday there was an article about property taxes, and there was sort of a penalty that kicked into place for certain cities that's been really tough. And I think that we need to take a good look at the last change and consider making some fixes to that will make it work better for everyone before we roll into something else. And look, I know there are some people who feel overburdened by property taxes, but it's a very complex system. And once you start, it's sort of like one of these things where you start pulling a thread, and it or and part of the whole thing unravels, or whack-a-mole because you push if you push right now, if you say you can't spend money here or you can't raise taxes here, as if a city or county really needs money for something and there's some other levy that they're allowed to raise, they may end up raising it there. It's a very complex system, as I said, and it's not easy to just say change it or lower it when they've been basically fiddling with it for the last 11 years or so. We have home rule in this state. It's in the state constitution. Let local governments function. If the people don't like what they're seeing, if the people don't like what they're getting, they'll vote them out. But let them do their jobs.
State Senator Janice Weiner will lead the Democratic caucus in the Iowa Senate. They return to Des Moines for the Iowa legislative session next week. Senator Janice Weiner, thanks for joining me.
Thanks.
And we're back. This is Zach, and I'm sitting here with Chase Seibert. For my money, I think one of the most interesting policies that anyone could be spending time on is universal school lunches. It's something I hope to focus on a lot during the 2025 legislative session. Is this a policy you've been thinking a lot about?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just like a slam dunk, great policy. I feel like the only pushback you get sometimes is like, well, we should make the food healthier. And it's like, okay, do that too. Great. Let's do both.
Yeah, walk and talk at the same time, guys.
Yeah. I just, I don't see any excuse to not feed kids. Any less pressure to take off parents is great. I just think it's something we should have done for a long time. Even interesting, I think, with the start of like feeding school lunch programs started as out of like World War II, like how malnourished kids were or men were going into the army in World War II. They were like super, super malnourished. So they're like, what are these schools feeding kids? And they kind of looked into it and started like making programs based on that. And so it's very interesting history there.
Yeah, Chuck Grassley might have had better nutrition because of all the groundwork that was laid back then in places like Iowa. So,
Yeah.
and for our next cornhole matchup, we've got a special election in a eastern Iowa Senate district. This is an area that covers South Jackson County, all of Clinton County, and North Scott County. And I spoke with the Democrat running for that seat. Mike Zimmer is on the local school board, and he spoke to me for a couple minutes about his bid. That's coming up on Cornhole Champions. There's a special election looming in eastern Iowa. Senate District 35 was represented by Republican State Senator Chris Knoyer of LeClaire before Governor Kim Reynolds selected her as the state's new number 2. Reynolds has since announced a January 28th special election to fill the vacancy, setting in motion a new possibility for Democrats as they try to build a future after a hard election year. Mike Zimmer is the president of Central DeWitt School Board and the owner of Mike Zimmer Construction. He's running to flip Knoyer's Senate District 35 seat, focusing on public education and the economic success of middle-class families. Hello, Mike.
Good morning, Zach. Thank you for having me.
Good morning. Can you tell me a little bit, kind of just about the district you're hoping to represent?
Well, the District 35 represents the southern part of Jackson County, all of Clinton County, and then the northern tier of Scott County townships. And basically, it is an area that I've lived in my entire life. So school to teaching to administration to doing construction business that I've been involved with. I've been in Jackson, Clinton, and Scott counties.
I always think of the legislature as being kind of a hard sell, particularly for the minority party. You've got to show up to Des Moines during the winter, get your teeth kicked in during the session, all for kind of what is an opposition seat. I wonder kind of why it is that you decided to raise your hand.
Well, I've been on the receiving end after devoting 40 years of my career to public education as both a teacher, a bus driver, a coach, an assistant principal, a principal at 2 school districts, and then as a director of secondary education for a large school district. And I guess I've entered into this as I would call it a death by 1,000 cuts. I feel like the legislation that has been passed over the last 7 years involving public school education has been ill-informed, not rolled out or researched very well. And then when it is passed, we on the end of implementing are left with trying to figure out, well, what did you mean? Are you sure have you thought this through? And by that point in time, once the legislation is signed, we got to pick up the pieces. And I feel often that it's like rolling out software where, okay, we're going to roll it out and then you guys figure out how to make it work and then get back to us and we'll fix it. So it's been a slow grind by the time I got to this point of going, what is happening? I don't even recognize the state I live in anymore. And so that's one of the reasons that after I retired in June of 2023, retirement, I was not anticipating it to look like this, but what causes someone to move and to think, I'm either going to stop complaining or I'm going to try and at least see if I can have an impact and be a voice of reason. That's where I'm at.
And can you, from the school boards, your seat on a school board, where did you first kind of begin seeing some of that kind of impact that the legislature was having on your district?
My run for the school board came from my experience during the COVID years when the school board that I was working for at the district I was at before, I thanked them every single time they met about their support and understanding as we were going through the COVID years and trying to keep our kids safe and our staff safe and try and keep our buildings open. At the time that I was seeing reactions from parents that I just didn't understand it. I was like, we're trying to do what you're asking us to do. And so when I retired, and I saw a school board seat coming up in the district that I live, I thought, well, I do have a skill set and something that maybe I could help the district that I live in. So I ran, and this is my second year on the board. I will say that when I was voted in, the way the legislature has it set up, there's always a turnover of the majority of the board every other cycle. And so we have a 5-person at-large board, and 3 of the seats were up, and none of the 3 incumbents were seeking reelection, and so there were 3 open seats. And I just felt that maybe I might have something to offer. And now that I'm on the board, uh, we had a difficult first year where we needed to go through some changes, and now the second year we're into a situation where we're facing the financial um, results of years and years and years of underfunding of public education, and that's where we're at right now. We're not in a happy place. It's not that the sky is falling in, but we've got to cut $1.7 million out of our budget coming into fiscal year 25. And so tonight will be the first night that I'll be attending a community forum where we're going to sit down and with community and teacher input start taking a look at places that we can minimize the hurt of these cuts and still maintain offering programs and services to all of our students and parents.
The largest single source of expense for any district is going to be personnel. How do you begin making those cuts?
Well, the most humane way, and you're absolutely correct, when between upper 70s to 85% of a school district budget is personnel, you cannot look at making that kind of reduction in expenditures without looking at personnel. And the first thing you try to look at is what retirees do we have coming up and what can we anticipate? And then can we afford to not replace those positions? And when you make those evaluations, you have to look at class size. So you're weighing out, what do we want for class sizes for a kindergarten class? What do we expect for a class size of a 4th grade? And what about an 8th grade? And what about a high school class? And so those are all factors that we weigh in. And so that's why we did offer an early retirement package to our teachers to see if those that might be at that point in their life where it would make sense. And that with the financial package that we offer, the big thing is insurance. Insurance is a huge thing. So they have to look at, okay, if I'm 60 years old, how do I cover the insurance for my family from age 60 to 65? And if I'm going to look at retiring earlier than that, well, obviously you've got a much larger gap to fill. And when family insurance might be costing anywhere between $2,000 and $2,500 a month, that is a major decision maker. So that plays an important part into our decision about how can we reduce expenditures in a humane fashion before we have to go to a level of having to what they refer to as pink slipping somebody.
When you go into the legislature, what's kind of your short list of issues that you would like to see the state legislature get behind?
Well, knowing that we're in, I'll call it the super minority, the bottom line is just with my background is maybe when we're in committee and some of these ideas are coming up from people that are not educators and it's not their fault. They just don't know what they're implementing, what the unintended consequences are. And my voice, if anything, could just be ask a question. Hey, have you thought about this? If you're going to implement this, let me play this out for you. Let me show you how this is going to work. And maybe that could be cause for pause. And there are some very technical things dealing with education policy that's been in place that I would like to bring the legislature's attention to, saying, I don't think you intended for this to happen, but this is the result of. And I've got they're small things, but they're big on how we offer concurrent enrollment classes to students in high school. So it's how we implement the governor's work-based learning about apprenticeships, I've been heavily involved in those aspects and very supportive of the governor's work. I might add all the way down from when Terry Branstad in 2016 rolled out um, Future Ready Iowa. So again, I've been very supportive of that work because it helps Iowans, and that's what I'm talking about. A lot of the things that Governor Branstad came up with because of his years in Iowa were about Iowans. What I've been seeing now is ideas coming out that they did not come from Iowans. They came from outside think tanks saying, "Hey, this is working in this state or that state. Why don't you make it work in Iowa?" Without asking Iowans. And that's a piece that is really becoming weary in my eyes.
You have a pretty short amount of time to get your campaign out in front of voters in District 35. Can you tell me a little bit about kind of what that work has looked like on the ground?
Yeah, the groundwork has been intense. So when the governor made the announcement of Senator Knoyer to become lieutenant governor, I think Iowa code states that she had 5 days then to announce when the special election was going to be. And when that was done over the holiday season, it is what it is. But I thought, wow, that's really not being very fair to the voters of Iowa about in this
Happy
section. Yeah,
Christmas.
yeah. Merry Christmas. Here you go. So we have started off with an organization piece. We've already started going door to door knocking. Fundraising is a big deal. And I'm just going to be honest with your listeners. Here's what we expect to happen, and that is that the Republicans will come out. They'll dust off their campaign TV commercials that they did before, attacking people about transgender kids and litter boxes and just all kinds of crazy nonsense that has nothing to do with what we're about. And so that portion we're just kind of gearing up for, and I'm hoping that by meeting people face to face and that those people that have worked with me know that who I am, and they can look at it and go, "What are you talking about? That is not who he is." But they're going to try their hardest to define me and put that same label that they did for every single Democrat in every single state and every single public office. So that's what we're gearing up for.
If people want to plug in with your campaign, do you have places that you're sending them?
Yes, if they could go to MikeZimmerForIowa.com, they'll find the website, my Facebook page, Instagram. And what I'm doing is every single day, I've got a new Iowa value that is rolling out. And it's the history of the progressiveness of Iowans. And I've always said that we stand on the shoulders of those that came before us. And it starts with before we were even a state, that Iowans granted women the right to retain property, which was never even heard of, and that the University of Iowa was the first post-secondary institute in the country in 1855 to open its doors to men and women. That's who we are.
Mike Zimmer is the Democratic candidate running in Senate District 35. Mike, thanks so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Zach.
That was another episode of Cornhole Champions. If you like the show, please rate it, subscribe, and share it with your friends. While you're at it, sign up for my newsletter at cornholechampions.substack.com and get these episodes straight to your inbox when they drop Wednesday mornings. Cornhole Champions is a weekly podcast powered by Iowa Starting Line. The podcast is produced by me with music from Avery Mossman. Cornhole Champions is a proud member of the Iowa Writers Collaborative. We'll see you with a new episode next Wednesday. Until then, I'm Zachary Oren Smith.
And I'm Chase Seibert.
Thanks for listening.
Sorry to Amy Heads.
Sorry to the Amy Heads. The Amy Heads will not be satisfied.
You get Chase.
This is an episode that will live in infamy.